This is the Rebel HR Podcast, the podcast about all things innovation in the people space. I'm Kyle Rode. Let's start the show. Welcome back, Rebel HR listeners. We're going to have a fun conversation today. With us, we have Adam Gordon. Adam is the co-founder of an organization called Poetry. They are a recruiter enablement technology platform. So excited to talk a little bit about that. This is an area that we've dabbled in a little bit, but we're going to go deep into recruiting and technology today. Adam, thanks for joining the show.
Hi, Kyle. Thanks very much for having me. And it's great to know that you understand my accent because you've got a team based over here where I am in Scotland. So hopefully your audience can also understand everything I'm saying.
I can understand you perfectly well. It's a nice Scottish lilt. You know, it's not like an extremely heavy accent. So it's like it's pleasing to the ears. It's certainly better than my Midwest Iowa hometown accent, I guess we'll call it that.
Well, one thing that I've noticed is my Scottish accent is quite popular in the Midwest, and it's not as popular in Glasgow, whereas I'm pretty sure that your Midwestern accent is going to be quite popular in Scotland. People appreciate something different, don't they?
Yeah, they do. You know, it's funny. So I'm very fortunate that I get to travel around the world and interact with teams internationally. And it is kind of funny to be the novelty accent and to try to understand what people hear when they hear you. Because obviously nobody thinks they have the accent. Everybody else has the accent. But then to have them compare you to other Americans is funny. You know, it's there's the Southern accent, the Northeast accent, California accent. You know, it's good fun.
Yeah. I mean, to people in Europe, an American accent's pretty much an American accent. It doesn't, they don't necessarily notice the differences.
Sure.
But one other interesting thing I've noticed is my accent. In New York City, nobody even notices it because it's just so international.
Sure.
Whereas in Chicago, everybody turns their head. Who's that guy?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you were in my town, town of 200,000 in the area, people would notice. Yeah. But at any rate, thank you for spending your evening with us, and for the audience's sake, Adam was gracious enough to do this twice. We tried to do this once. We were in the middle of a great conversation, but our internet connection was just awful. So Adam, thank you for being flexible on scheduling and spending a little bit of additional time with us so that we can really capture.
No, not at all. But
your work.
It's quite an interesting story that I had Starlink put in. My wife had a Starlink dish delivered to our house, and it got set up that day, and I was expecting it to be brilliant, and it took a couple of days. It was pretty choppy for a couple of days, but it's definitely a lot better now.
Good. Yeah. Well, you're coming through loud and clear right now, so I appreciate that. So I want to dive into recruiting enablement a little bit, and by way of background, Adam has been in recruiting since 1999. He's worked in agency, recruitment marketing, consulting, PricewaterhouseCoopers, iCIMS, significant background in recruiting. So I'm curious with your background and your successful career, what motivated you to step outside of the kind of the comfort of a big company W-2 job and start your organization that's focused specifically on recruiting enablement?
Well, I'm not a great employee, to be honest. I spent my first 10 years working for other organizations, and I learned a lot. I treated it like an extended education session. I wasn't hugely, I was a mid-level performer. I probably spent a lot of time doing my job, but actually being effective, probably 20% of it. So, it wasn't really the right thing for me. In 2009, I set up a talent sourcing business, just finding people on the internet that companies might want to hire. Really, desktop research was what we did. And then in 2016, what became clear to me was recruitment technology was lacking certain things that sales and marketing technology had been operating successfully for a few years. And so myself and a co-founder, Scott McRae, created the world's first marketing automation technology for talent acquisition. It was called Candidate ID. And we built that up while learning how to build a tech company in those first few years. And we sold that company to iCIMS in 2022. But one of the things that has occurred to me is the gap in the market was not just for marketing automation technology. There's a lot of tech in mainstream sales and marketing, in e-com, in customer success, customer services, which we could really benefit from. So my thesis is talent acquisition is very, very similar to mainstream sales and marketing. And yet we have got a completely separate and different type of technology ecosystem. So I'm quite good at coming up with the idea, launching it into the market, getting the first 100 customers, telling the story. And so we're really looking to do the same as we did with Candidate ID, but this time it's inspired by the concept of sales enablement. So, sales enablement is a profession and a technology which supports salespeople with all the right content assets and calculators and tools and scripts and objection handling responses and learning that salespeople need from first stage outreach to a cold prospect right through to closing the deal. And if you work through all of the 50 to 100 steps in a sales process, there's a lot of parallel between those and a recruiting process.
Sure.
Yet our technology in recruiting is pretty much all aimed at managing the vacancy.
Right.
Getting the people, managing the vacancy, managing the onboarding. But actually, there's a heck of a lot of other things that recruiters do which doesn't get covered by those technologies. Right. And in the mainstream sales and marketing area, they've done a great job of filling the gaps. And there are countless ways that we can take inspiration in HR from sales and marketing. And they're ahead. And the reason that they're ahead is simply because there's a heck of a lot more sales and marketing people than there are HR people in the world. And therefore, if I've got some world-leading, tech breakthrough, and I was trying to put it into HR, the first VCs that I speak to would be looking at whether or not there is a bigger addressable market opportunity. And if it was something applicable to sales and marketing, then they'd probably tell me to go there first. Right. So, it's just natural. We're a smaller market. So it's natural that we're not going to get the world's leading innovation. But if we can close the gap, because some people in recruiting will say the gap's like 10 years, they're 10 years ahead. And I'm not sure they're 10 years ahead, but they're years ahead. But if we can close the gap, that's really the space that I'm trying to operate in, is how do we reduce the delta?
We'll be back after a quick break.
And so used to having everything in front of them right away that we forget that innovation just takes time. I myself, I get frustrated too. Why? And this is being one of my best friends is, hey, I talk to you all the time. Hey, man, I'm frustrated in the fact that I can't seem to just get there in the next day. But that's just not how these things work, right? Innovation needs to be planned out. It needs to be very methodical. And then when it finally hits, that's when it seems like to everyone else that it sort of just came out of nowhere. But to you, the amount of dedication that it took over that time.
Absolutely. And I think what's interesting is that like you said, a lot of this technology, it's really, it's like, it's worked in a certain department. They're like, oh yeah, we should use this for recruiting. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Maybe this will work over here, right? As opposed to having this like methodical, well, here's the actual workflow. Here's all the tasks that a recruiter actually does, and what's the tool to help them with that. And I think one of the things you mentioned, it really resonated, and it's the management of vacancies versus the actual job of recruiting, right? And it's very different. But so often, I mean, the day-to-day, I mean, I started in recruiting and talent acquisition, and, go hire 90 people for the holiday season now. And it's so much of our job is it's managing the noise. The squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? So it's like, oh my gosh, who's the most upset with me right now? What's the hottest job fill? And it's so easy to forget about, just follow the noise and forget about all the other stuff that's really, really critical in making sure that you kind of strategically address the noise proactively, right? And so as you think about that, and as you're starting to dig through this concept of recruiter enablement, what are some of those really kind of key areas where you see the gap, where there's a need, there's not really the perfect type of technology, and where are you focusing some of your efforts right now to help these recruiters be more successful with the day-to-day?
Yeah, there's two specific things. So I spent 200 hours earlier this year in 2023 doing focus groups with talent acquisition people. And they started off earlier in the year very open. What are the biggest challenges you've got just now that you don't have a solution for? And then more and more, it got towards this area of enablement. How can we augment the capability of our recruiters? And there was two very specific challenges that I wanted to solve within the one solution. And the first is that when I started in recruiting, the only written content that I ever made use of was when I got my pen out and I got an A4, that's not what you call it in the US. I'm not sure what you call it, but like a sheet of paper. And I wrote out 2 or 3 sentences on this piece of paper every Wednesday. And I would send it in a fax to the local newspaper, and they would put that advert in the back of the newspaper for a Friday morning. That's the only time I really wrote anything. Everything else was using my voice. It was on the telephone, or it was in a meeting with somebody. And so, that's a long time ago that I started. It was 1999. But of course, we started using databases and email very shortly after that. But, the way that the job of a recruiter has gone from being primarily using their voice to primarily using written text is, very clear. So recruiters typically get hired because they're gregarious and they've got good emotional intelligence. They're good at achieving influence. And they're not normally hired because they're great marketers. So, most talent acquisition teams of maybe 10 or more will have people dedicated to recruitment marketing. But what they're not doing normally is putting into the hands of the recruiters, here's some job advert templates, here's some social media outreach templates, here's some social media post templates, here's templates for colleague stories, here's templates for emails, here's templates for overcoming objections. And so, inspired by sales enablement technology, I think putting all of the assets that a recruiter needs, all of the marketing assets, whether that's written content or it's visual or another format, putting that into the hands of the recruiters, making it really easy for them to identify the assets they need. That was the first thing that we wanted to do. As we got a little bit deeper into it, what became clear was beyond this, there's a lot of other things that are not really catered for. So if I'm a recruiter, I have to go to one place to find policies. I have to go to another place to find processes. I have to go to another place to find like interview templates. I have to go to another place to find out, I don't know, like a hiring manager intake template. And actually, half of these things don't exist. So I'll go and spend time trying to find it and then get to a conclusion, which is we don't actually have it. So what we wanted to, I mean, the next one is learning, on top of that as well. How do I use the ATS? How do I use the CRM? How do I do assessment? How do I do interviewing? What's our culture all about? What's our EVP all about? So, like recruiter learning is typically aimed at the performance activities. How do I do advertising better? How do I do interviewing better? How do I achieve more influence? It's the sort of thing that social talent offers, or you could maybe LinkedIn Learning. But actually the nuanced things about our organization, what is the way that we do it? That's often something that was lacking. And then the final one was to do with like tools. Everybody knows what their ATS is. They know what their CRM is. But do they instantly remember the name of that video solution they should be using, or that, competency-based interviewing thing? Or what was that tool again that uncovers email addresses from TikTok profiles? We have to use, as recruiters, we have to use so many different tools and assets and bits of content and learning and things like that. A lot of the time, recruiters aren't given what they need. And when they are, it tends to be very disparate. So it's stressful for a recruiter to go and find, all of the stuff that they need, let alone, we call it toggle tax. They're constantly toggling from one tab to another tab, trying to, get their tasks accomplished. So bringing all of that into the one workspace. What we found is, yes, there are some recruitment technologies that do maybe one or two of those things that I've just said. And, we would be aiming for a talent acquisition team to replace like 8 things with our one workspace. A lot of the time it's no solution. They don't really have any kind of a solution. Sometimes they're doing it on an enterprise system like SharePoint. SharePoint for the larger organizations, it's nearly always SharePoint that they are looking to replace because they've tried to do something on there, but it's very static. And, it's very static. It's not easy to use. Things go out of date really easily. Maybe they're using Notion or Confluence or something like that if they're a sort of smaller organization. But to build out a solution in a Notion or a Confluence for like a Boolean string generator or a job advert generator or a social media post generator or something like that, you can't really do it. You could do it if you combined that with ChatGPT or maybe a bunch of other things as well, but it would be cobbled together. So that was a very long answer to your question. I'm sorry. I'm just excited about the whole concept of enablement.
Yeah, no, I think and I'm happy to just let you run because there's so much, right? Like, I mean, that's the reality. And I think, you commented on the toggle tax, right? I think that's an important, concept. And I think I like that you actually named it something because it's like, there's so much out there. And as I look at human resources, like, in general, the idea of HR is pretty simple. Like, hire great people, put them in the right roles, make sure they're performing, keep them all, engaged.
Yeah.
And try not to let them all quit. It's really, it's as simple as that. But within that, in the recruiting space, especially, it's one of those areas that's so incredibly dynamic. There's so much change. I mean, every new communication tool, every new social media platform, every type of social movement that's occurring, and now employers are expected to have a perspective or a voice on it. Candidates have an expectation that employers are tooled into this, right? And I have a perspective on it. and it's so much. And I personally experienced the toggle tax where it's like, let's see which platform am I on today? Where am I seeing, engagement from people that are reaching out? Is it LinkedIn? Maybe it's not LinkedIn. Is it my applicant tracking system? Maybe it is. Which one of those systems can I text them, candidates from again? Oh, wait a minute. Did I post my EVP on all the locations yet? What didn't we adjust our vision? Isn't that slightly different now? Oh, yeah, I got a new principal. I got to talk to people. There's all these things. And what I love about the approach here is, the problem's essentially similar to a sales problem, right? It's making sure you're all on message, making sure you're following the right protocols and tools. But a lot of times recruiters are not necessarily schooled in that school of thought. Many of them did not go to school for marketing. Many of them went to school, for human resources or general business, and they're just like good at a career fair, right?
Yeah.
Or good with people. That doesn't necessarily mean they know this. So giving them a tool and giving them a structure, with the right person that does have that gregarious attitude, like that's how you win, right? Like that's how you truly go out and connect the right people to the right opportunity. At the end of the day, it's providing that service, right?
What they don't want to be doing is spending time having to think about, what am I going to put in this social media post? Mm. They don't want to be spending time having to think about, as you said, which system is it I use to actually send out the text messages? They want to be spending as much time as possible with the candidates who need maybe a bit of convincing, who haven't yet applied, but they want to bring them into the process, or doing there's certain tasks that recruiters get pretty well paid for that they're only spending 20% of their time actually doing.
Sure. Yeah. It's almost like, it's like your recruiter really should be your best communicator interpersonally to a candidate about why they should work there.
Yeah.
Or at a minimum, at least painting the appropriate picture for a candidate to make an informed decision, right? Maybe it's not the right fit for the candidate. That's a better outcome than, forcing a hire. But you need the right funnel, right? You've got to have the right people talking to the recruiter at the right time. And you don't want your recruiter like sifting through 75 emails trying to figure out, who is this person that I talked to, and digging through papers of like interview notes. And I mean, and I'm guilty. It's like, oh shoot, I forgot which person was this? Was this the person that was the volleyball player in college? Yeah. Or was this the person that was the captain of the debate squad? And I can't, was this the person wearing the blue shirt? It's like there's so much noise, and like anything to help us recall, the appropriate candidate, the conversation, all those sorts of things is really critical.
Yeah, there is, and if we can do something, to help save recruiters a bit of stress, because it's stressful. It really is stressful trying to remember everything and trying to. If we can save recruiters a little bit of stress, then that's job accomplished. It leads me to an interesting question, which is around. There's a lot of talk in talent acquisition about when is there a recruiterless future, and if there is, when is it? And so that's an interesting point, because the tasks that recruiters needed to do 10 years ago, a lot of those they don't need to do, but they need to do different ones today. And, in another 10 years, it's going to look quite different again. So there's a pretty interesting subject in there about who needs a human, which types of jobs need a human recruiter's, input.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting thought exercise. I guarantee you we're going to need recruiters, but the skill sets are going to be different, right? Like like 10 years ago, we did not need a recruiter to understand the latest and greatest AI and how to leverage that for social media marketing, right? Like that was not in the conversation.
No.
Right. But now it's like, yeah, how do you, how do you leverage AI? Is it, that's one of the questions, or how, what's your perspective on HR technology, right? And I think it's broadly, it's a really big question, in the marketing space as well, right? And then I think that the other question is, as a recruiter, how do you actually stand out from the other recruiters, right? Like what is the differentiator? Because there's so much noise out there, and a lot of it's like spam and bots and all this other stuff that, like, I think that authentic human connection is almost more important now because there's so many, technology tools, and there's also some skepticism related to that in the candidate market. So it's going to be really interesting to see where this, 10 years from now, where we're at.
Yeah, I think that in the executive area, it's probably not going to be much different, because it's not hugely different today than it was 10 years ago.
Right.
In the early career space, the kind of graduate, school leaver space, it's going to be a complete, recruiters are not going to be doing interviewing people and assessing people. It will be a funnel. It'll be all about, it'll be marketing at the top of the funnel, and then it'll be all about candidate experience through the funnel, designing experiences that bring people through. And then in that mid-level area, it's got to be to do with, in the mid-level area, the sort of salaries in US terms of kind of 50 to 150, that kind of level, which includes most accountants and marketing people and salespeople and whatever. If it's in demand talent, like in healthcare and in tech and in engineering and in construction, yeah, humans will still be needed to achieve the influence. There's still not going to be enough candidates for the demand for those individuals, I don't think.
Right.
So it's all about supply and demand. I think that's the thing that really makes the big impact on how much human work needs done by recruiters, and now, in fact, and in the future.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's, and I think, we see that in those microcosm, kind of areas where, like the skilled labor, technical talent, IT and tech and coding, and, there's healthcare, there's just that scarcity of talent. And so it really is about marketing and convincing and selling, your candidates versus the pools where there's broader talent, which seems few and far between. I don't know. I'm curious if there's anybody out there that would say it's really easy to hire right now. I don't know. I haven't heard that very frequently.
Yeah, I mean, I think partially the brand of the job itself. If it's a job that everybody wants to do, then, which there's not very many of those. If there's a job that everybody wants to do, then you've got a big advantage. And the other way that you've got a big advantage is if your employer brand is highly desirable.
Sure.
And there's not many organizations that are like that. I think the if you're in tech, the Apples and maybe Amazons and Googles and Facebooks, for example, if you're coming out of some top level university, then McKinsey and Goldman Sachs, those types are going to be particularly desirable. Some of the nuanced in the legal world, there's top tier firms, and in the accounting world, there's the big four. But yeah, for most organizations, they don't have the luxury of being inundated with the exact right people for all the jobs that they've got. Right.
And I think the other thing, maybe the final thing we talk about, the recruiter enablement piece as well, is so much of this, because you're competing against so many employers, it is about making sure you are not missing a step, that you've got this, that you're checking every single box in that process and making sure that you're keeping the candidates warm, that you're checking all the boxes on what the skills need to be. You've got the right, message out there in the market. and ultimately that you're doing this in a really, really efficient manner. So that, that sometimes that just being simply the quickest and most efficient and speediest in the process can land you more candidates because, because it was the first offer they got and they took it and they joined you, and so that enablement thing, both from, reducing stress and being effective, but also being more efficient is such a critical piece as well.
I agree. There's two solutions that we're offering within our recruiter enablement platform, which are, they were not among the first that we created, but they are among the most popular. And one of them is, we call it Crib Sheets, which is not a great name for it. I think we're going to change the name of that solution, but it's basically, what's your script? What's your elevator pitch?
Yep.
Yeah. And there's like companies are adding in their elevator pitch for go-to-market people, elevator pitch for tech people, elevator pitch for product people, whatever it is. And, it's a 30 seconds of, here's why I'm contacting you. Here's why you should listen. Here's why we should have this conversation and why you should agree to talking to me about this opportunity. And then the other one that's also popular is the objection handling. My company makes alcohol products, and not everybody likes that. What's a good way to respond to that? My company, our company's brand is far less known than the competition. How do we overcome that? Those types of things. Sure. And it's really great. What we're seeing is it's getting at recruiters team meetings, they're actually ending up having time to focus on, as a team, what is the best, most convincing way to overcome that objection. So, if you can fine tune all of the touch points, then that'll help you to go faster. It'll help you to bring more people through the funnel.
Right. Absolutely. And make sure, I think maybe the most important thing is you're also getting you're getting them the information that they need to make a good decision so that it can be the right fit, right? It's not just about, butts and seats, right? It's about the right butts and seats. And if you've got everybody, really saying the same thing, saying the accurate thing as it relates to your organization, you're going to have better outcomes in your recruiting as well. So, there's so many reasons why it's so important. With that being said, we are coming towards the end of our time together, and I'm fascinated to hear your responses and your perspective on the flash round. Are you ready to go?
Yes.
All right, let's go. Question number 1: where does HR need to rebel?
HR needs to ignore what it's done in the past and entirely remove all confines of this is the way we've done it. This is the way we do it, because a lot of what it's doing today was set up in the 1990s.
Yeah.
And I'm not suggesting hallucinogenic narcotics here, but opening up your mind to every possibility is a great thing to do. And I would encourage doing a cross-functional workshop with the head of engineering and the head of finance and the head of marketing and going, okay, this is how we're doing everything. How would you deal with all of this? And what would you do? I really enjoy technical companies. I think that they do HR and talent acquisition really, really well because they're very inspired by engineering thinking.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, I think there's so much room. I don't want to say that HR is doing a bad job, but we've got to acknowledge that HR is a modern discipline.
Yeah.
It's not an old thing like accounting or engineering. It's a pretty newborn discipline. And certainly the area that I know best, talent acquisition, is very newborn discipline. It's like most companies haven't had TA people for more than 10 years. Right. So yeah, I mean, take inspiration look at sit up and look outside and take inspiration from other areas.
I love it. I love it. I totally agree. And I think, I mean, you're really preaching the choir here, but so much of the things that we call quote best practices are, I mean, the 90s, like saying that they were like developed in the 90s, that's probably a little bit new school for some of the tools that we use, right? Like something as simple as like performance evaluations and performance review scores and, the scales that so many of us use. Like some of this stuff goes back to like the 60s and 70s. And it's like, this is not the environment that we're operating in anymore. This is not what our employees need to thrive anymore. But it's what we know. And it's like getting out of this, like the comfort of what we know and understand and asking the question, well, what actually works, right? And what do our teams need? So yeah,
it's an interesting paradox, that, isn't it? Because we're using HR as a relatively modern sort of business discipline. However, we remain using tools that were created long before HR. Right. By probably old-fashioned psychology thinking.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Like look at the world of psychology and then ask yourself, okay, which school of psychology did this tool come from? And I can almost guarantee you that school of psychology is probably no longer like considered relevant anymore, right? Like, just the research on psychology and the brain is like we're just barely scratching the surface, right? And a lot of our assumptions of what we think we know about human behavior has been debunked over the last number of years. We could have a whole nother 16 podcast series about that. But the reality is, we've got to be open-minded to this. And I would agree that there are some technological tools out there, and there's some really simple things that we can do that will actually save us a hell of a lot of time on the administrative side of things and help our employees more. Yeah. So couldn't agree more. All right. Question number 2. Who should we be listening to?
Who should we be listening to? Anybody that is an expert around design thinking and anybody that is an expert around experience design. So there are so many disconnected experiences in talent acquisition in particular. Like, in fact, in HR in general, I'm going to give you a talent acquisition example, then a more general kind of HR example. I'm going to chunk it up. So I could go onto a company's career site and it looks brilliant. And then I click through to apply. I'm like, this looks amazing company to work for. And then I click through to apply and I'm suddenly on Workday and it's going to take me 30 minutes to register.
Right.
This is a very disconnected experience and somebody has to go in and stop that from happening. It's just wrong because you are messing up your supply chain. You're messing up your talent funnel.
Yep.
So you can't, there's no point in having a great career site if you've got a shitty application experience.
Yep.
So that's one example. But chunking it up a little bit, I personally believe that an organization's employer brand should be the absolute, apart from keeping the company legal, for the chief people officer, the employer brand should be up there at the top of the apex as like top equal priority alongside HR laws around keeping the company legal. Because and everything from the way that we hire our people to the way that we train them to the way that we apply internal mobility to the way that we augment our culture, all of this, every single, to the way people get paid, every aspect of this links to the employer brand. And I think it's deprioritized because often it's maybe an individual contributor who is responsible for that, reporting into a talent acquisition manager, who reports into a head of talent, who reports into a chief people officer. So, the whole thing is buried far too low inside the HR organization. But aligned with that, there is often somebody or a small team which is responsible for employee engagement, and they have not got the same line management. They don't sit in the same team as the people who do employer branding. That to me is utter madness. Like, this should be one completely, joined up discipline, and it's not. So there's something about design thinking in that. There's something about experience design from the first time somebody finds out about your organization, discovers your organization, through to the day that they retire and they're no longer working for you anymore. They're an alumnus. There should be a completely connected journey all the way through that.
Yeah.
More specifically, right? Who should we be listening to? I listen to. I'm in tech, and I listen to the Product Led podcast, and I listen to SASTR, SAASTR. They are for people in tech. However, I believe it is rammed with learnings that everybody can benefit from. Right. So again, sorry, that was a long answer to your. There's meant to be a quick fire round, doesn't it? And
it's good. It's good. No, yeah. There's so much important content there, and I couldn't agree more. And I think this thought of employee experience is such a critical thing. And I've been talking about this over the last few years. That it's almost like considered new school, but it's so incredibly critical. And then broadening our perspective, again, going back to kind of what we were talking about earlier, like, we got to be thinking way outside of the HR kind of tunnel, right? Like, there's so many disciplines outside of our function that make perfect sense to import, right? And to listen and to learn and to, like, design thinking, continuous improvement, engineering process mapping. What's the UX on your website? If you don't have if you don't have a one-click apply that does not require somebody to re-enter all of the stuff they just entered, on their resume, like, guess what? There's technology for that. You can take all the stuff on the resume, put it in, and it'll be in there, and you'll have all the information you need without making them sit there for 30 minutes. But if you don't have that, you're like, I'm sorry, nobody wants to sit there for an hour filling out an application and then hope that you call them back, right? Like, come on.
Exactly.
Couldn't agree more. All right, last question. Just wonderful discussion here. How can our listeners learn more about your organization, connect with you, and get into the recruiter enablement mindset?
Couple of things. If you look up Recruiter Enablement on YouTube, you'll find a channel there where I've recorded over 140 interviews in the last 7 months with people about the subject. People from all angles of talent acquisition and HR. And I'm on LinkedIn. I'm easy to find. Adam Gordon Poetry. And the third thing is, if you go to poetryhr.com, you can sign up there for your free Recruiter Enablement Workspace admin account. Every organization gets one free login for our platform. The real benefit is the network effect, where everybody's in the platform using it and benefiting from each other. But setting up, like, registering for that free admin account, if you're only a small team of one person, then it's free for you forever. If you're a bigger team, then you can send somebody in to scout out the environment and determine, like, how you would be using. There's a lot of solutions in there. It's 28 inbuilt solutions. So you're not going to start with all of those. You're going to start with maybe 6 or something, and then roll them out, on a schedule. But that would be the 3 best ways to connect with me.
Awesome. And we will have all that information in the show notes. Open up your podcast player, click in. Adam, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing some of your knowledge and expertise with our listeners. Take care.
It's been a real privilege. Thanks for having me.
All right. That does it for the Rebel HR podcast. Big thank you to our guests. Follow us on Facebook at Rebel HR Podcast, Twitter at Rebel HR Guy, or see our website at rebelhumanresources.com. The views and opinions expressed by Rebel HR Podcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any of the organizations that we represent. No animals were harmed during the filming of this podcast.
Baby.